Okay, so we're looking at the fact that Christians ask for things like, can I get a raise? Or can you help me with my small little problem here? While there are children starving to death in the world. Obviously, a heart wrenching scenario and not the easiest question to face. But in looking at it, it exposes some principles. First, I would suppose, and I hope you'd agree that most of the suffering going on in the world, especially on the note of starvation, is something that could be solved by mankind. In the case of third world countries where food sits and rots on docks, armies take it for themselves and stockpile it while neighboring villages suffer. And in the case of the United States, where we have the resources to feed everyone, but sometimes responsible adults don't get it for the children. And while we might not have mechanisms in place to solve a family's problems and take away all suffering, we certainly have the mechanisms in place to make sure our children don't starve. And those systems simply aren't used or properly distributed. So we find in examining worldwide suffering, especially the ongoing perpetual suffering of people, that by and large it's human systems, human intentions, and man's fault that this happens. So the solutions are there, the resources are there, and it could be argued that God set up our world for these problems to be solved and that it's not his fault. However, that does raise the next question, and that is, how does God stand by while these things happen? Well, we know from our recent history in the last 100 years, we know of things that God stands by and allows to happen. So let's bring up the worst case ones that we are aware of, one being the Holocaust, one being the starvation, the mass purposeful starvation in certain Soviet countries under communism. And we got some of the famine areas of Africa in recent decades. So we basically, what we see from this is that mankind is given freedom. Now, it says in the Bible that the earth was given to man. And we see that in Genesis, we see that in the Psalms. The earth is basically a gift to man from God. Therefore, mankind has been given a lot of freedom. Now, in a small scale, every time I'm about to say a bad word or every time I'm about to make a bad decision, should God stop me? And you would say that's taking away my freedom. That's being a dictator. Not only is he requiring certain things of me, but now he's actually forcing it physically. If my fist is about to hit somebody's face who is innocent and not deserving of that fist to hit them, does God hold my hand up as it's on its way? No. So on a small scale, I could walk out of this room right now and go hit an innocent person in the face. If I decide to do that, for whatever reason, God does not stop me. So it raises the much bigger question. At what point should God stop these atrocities from happening? It's not that he's going to stop the atrocities from happening. At what point should he stop our decisions from harming others? Well, the principle that is exposed is that after we realize that most of these things are clearly man's fault, and either an individual decision maker or an organization's decision, after we find this out, we find out that God doesn't stop their fist from hitting the people. In other words, in the case of the villagers, where the army people come in and soldiers come in and take all the food to stockpile it for their war effort, God doesn't stop them right then and there and take away their freedom to make that bad decision. So, on a bigger scale, he doesn't stop them. Adolf Hitler, commanding the decimation and murder of these millions of people, was not stopped in mid sentence and snuffed out. His freedom was not taken away. In not taking away freedom is a show of love. My ability to do what I was to do what I choose is the expression of not taking back a gift that was given to me. The commitment to my freedom is so high that the line where it stops is so far out there that it actually exposes the extent of the freedom given to me and given to us. Therefore, we are allowed to do good, and we know that in doing good, we could have chosen to do bad. Once the choice to do bad is taken away, then we are no longer free. If we're no longer free, we're not loved. So, as twisted as you might think this is sounding, the fact is, when you think it through, God taking away our freedom to do bad and God stopping the hands of the evildoers before the innocents receive the consequences is taking away our freedom. If we know that God is stopping the army in mid theft of that food, then we know he will likely stop us in our bad decision, and therefore our decision to do good is no longer free, it is forced. If I know that before my fist is thrown, it will be stopped, then I know that in doing good today was not a free decision. It was forced. So despite people's claims that God is dictatorial, he demonstrates to a uncomfortably large and magnificent degree that he is not dictatorial, that we do have freedom and we do have choice. Now, as far as degrees of care, I can only liken it to an unimaginable situation for me. But if I had two children, one in horrific suffering, one with cancer, and one that I'm doing everything I can to make sure is treated for sickness, and I have another child who's healthy and who wants a lollipop, God certainly demonstrates his ability to show love in degrees. While I am here in the United States hoping to get enough money to cover my expenses and to keep my family fed and to keep education and all the comforts and everything in place, I can ask God for help with that. There's a degree to suffering and when I am not able to potentially provide for my family, even though they're not going to starve to death, they might lose comfort, ability to move forward in the future, and some of the good things I'm trying to provide. Therefore, I, in that scenario, recognize myself as the relatively petty child who's asking for the lollipop, something relatively minor, something that's not extreme, while my sibling is asking for help with the sickness. Now, you ask yourself, how did I just contradict myself? I've got the parent who's going to do everything he can for the sick child and who cares about the child with the lollipop. So now you're asking, well, what about the whole standing by and showing love and freedom? It goes back to a last principle to point out. God, I believe, does everything he can for these starving people without taking away our freedom. I believe that in working with me and working with people that don't necessarily believe in God, but working through people and their freedom to do good, he brings answer to prayer for many of these suffering people. There is massive good in this area. There are resources that reach people. There is answer to prayer. There is good answer to prayer. There are people that get what they need. So the idea that he stands by and doesn't do anything is actually incorrect. I believe the principle, the final principle this exposes, is that God, in his loving kindness, does everything he can for these suffering children. He is addressing these prayers. He is addressing these issues. And he is doing it without violating mankind's freedom. And that is the ultimate expression of love and patience. Finally, a reminder, and not to downplay the suffering, but God is more concerned, and this is demonstrated again over and over, and same with this principle. He's more concerned with what happens for our eternity than he is about the quality and length of our life. I've said it before, I know I could die in a car accident on my way home. I could be victimized and killed at gunpoint or at a knife. I do not believe that shows that God does not love me. I believe that shows that God loves mankind so much that he will allow that horrible person with the knife to make that bad decision without sparing me the consequence for what that person decided. So grapple with that. And my next video will be on God's limitations, which is about time someone just flatly, squarely faces that one. Appreciate it. Thanks.